65% positive judgment on a full stomach. Let's go. Yes. I'm ready for that. Today we're going to talk about design systems. I am myself not too worried about AI taking over the world just yet. But what about design systems specifically? Whether or not they are a catalyst for good design. Do they really make design better? Who works with a design system? Almost everyone. And how many of you now have perfect design? Oh, Aaron. Aaron has perfect design. But he works in a bank, so it doesn't matter. We're going to talk about design decisions specifically, and how design decisions lead to subsequent decisions. Believe it or not, I'm now kind of a collector of toilets, toilet pictures. So I took this one at a venue where I gave a talk once, and this is just a picture that I made, so it's not a stock photo. But then I used it in a presentation, and now a lot of people I know send me pictures every once in a while. They go into a restroom and they see something like this and they're like, "Hey, Steven, I thought you'd like this picture." But the thing is, someone made this decision. And in the design system terms, they had their components, right? The components are right, but then someone made this kind of decision. And then when I go into this restroom and I see this, I have a decision to make. And especially if one of these is being used by someone. So either they're a very, very good friend or they're going to become a very good friend. This is the kind of thing we're talking about today. Anyone in the workshop, my workshop yesterday, we touched on the fact that design systems really are a collection of design decisions that you make. Some of those decisions are manifested in bits of code that we call components. We love to talk about components. All of these little micro decisions inform new decisions by anyone who's using this system. And we tell ourselves little stories about design systems, about what they are, what they can be, how we should use them, how we interact with them. And when I say stories, I mean lies, of course. We tell ourselves lies about what these systems really are. So I'm going to go through some lies today. There are 7. And we don't have a lot of time together today, so I'm going to go through them quite quickly. So we'll get started with lie number 1, and that's that most design systems are more than simply a collection of components, a glorified component library, because that's usually what they are, and that's usually what we focus on. People come up to me and say, "Well, Steven, dude, that's kind of your fault, because I read Brad Frost's Atomic Design, and this is the quote that he uses to open the book, and that's something that I said in 2011, but I didn't mean it that way. I probably should have said parts or something like that. I wasn't talking about technology. I was talking about this idea of bits and pieces, not necessarily web components or React components or things like that. So it wasn't about tech. So in retrospect, I probably could have worded that a little bit differently. Back in the day, Jeremy Keith made this thing called Pattern Primer. We thought it was really cool. It was just HTML and CSS, and you would kind of model your own little pattern primer after his, and a bunch of these popped up all over the place. It was an interesting time, and it was kind of, except for HTML and CSS, it was kind of tech independent. Didn't matter what tech stack you used, as long as HTML and CSS were in there. So a lot of design systems today, I think, are just overly complex versions of Jeremy's Pattern Primer. It doesn't offer much more than this. So components are necessary, but they're not sufficient. And why do we focus on them so much? Components are interesting once you combine them together and they work in a certain environment and they become something different. The purpose of a design system is to have a toolkit so that you can do something else. We had them for a reason. And it seems like we forget that reason and we focus on the system. We have conferences about design systems, which is good, but that's kind of like having carpenters having a conference about hammers or something like that. So we focus a lot on those systems because we're trying to make them better, but we have the risk that we're looking inside and not remembering the thing for which we have design systems in the first place. So this is a little bit of how design system teams look at the system. We are here, and we are the center of the universe, and we pass our components out to all the teams, and they have to do whatever they will with what we make. But really, this is probably this is my ideal model of how a design system would work. And that's me up there at the top. My role as creative director is kind of making people really angry because I have ideas about how things should be. And that creates a difference between what we have today and what we need to get to. And so design decisions are made. But rather than the design decisions being fed completely by the design system, we want the system to be fed by the reality of what designers are making. So what you're doing is you're turning around that idea, here's a system, go make things with that, but you develop a model where designers have a certain amount of flexibility, and they can, what they do influences what you put into the system. We see that backwards sometimes. So it's important to seek understanding about the environments in which your system will work. That's very important. Line number 2 is that documentation is optional. People don't like documentation. No one likes to read. That's the argument I hear all the time. No one likes to read. And that's true. That doesn't mean you shouldn't document things. If you make a decision, it's kind of important to know, unless you have the same employees from year 1 until we're all dead. You need to know who made the decision, why did they make that decision, what was the context at that time. Documentation is not optional. In fact, you could say that documentation is the hub of your entire design system. You could take your documentation, if it's good, and maybe your educational resources around that, and you could transfer it to any technology you want. So if you don't do that, then people don't know how to use your system. And this is a PowerPoint from my own company. I have some colleagues here. None of them made this slide. But they probably know people who make slides similar to this one. This is using all the right things. And none of them are used in the right way. Not one of them. It's 100% wrong with the right elements. This is what happens when you have the elements and you don't have enough guidance for the people who use them. This is the first design system that I ever worked with, was the Apple corporate identity. And they had this little notebook. It was a ring binder. This is a long time ago. I'm old. And it was pretty smart to have a ring binder because they could change things. They could just send you extra papers, and you could add them or take some out. And this was from a poster that they gave along with that ring binder. And basically, this was Apple's answer to, can I use your logo? Like, no. You can't use it like that. You can't use it in that color. So the answer was no to a lot of things. And you folded this out, and then they had a lot of examples of how you use it. It was kind of a design system without the tech behind it, and it worked really well. So design systems are not new. So it's really important to discover the best ways to communicate how to use all these parts of your system and how these bits and pieces work together. That's arguably the most important. How do we deal with these decisions? Line number 3 is that design systems should strive to be complete. Hey, don't we need some kind of like a modal popover thing? We don't have that yet. Should we make it? But who's going to use it? I don't know, but I'm sure someone's going to use it sometime. And arguably they would. But one of the things I liked in this book by Stuart Brand, How Buildings Learn, highly recommended, is that the buildings that we're able to adapt or that exist the longest are the ones that are the simplest. You can change them more. So the more tailor-made you make something, the harder it is to change. And the whole reason for a design system is that so you can easily change things. If you make it so that becomes hard, why do you have a system? It's not much different than just letting everyone put custom code everywhere. So refactoring, this idea of iterating, just like we do in design, you do that with your system as well. It's not rework in the sense of we didn't do it right the first time. It's just a natural part of the process. A design system is a process, not a product. So design your system for change, and do that by keeping it as simple as possible. Everything should go through kind of a Navy SEAL training if it should go into the system, yes or no. So this is not the same thing as trying to think up beforehand what possible things might we need. You're kind of fantasizing about the future. No one knows if that's going to be the future, and probably not. So you wait and see what you need, and you put that into the system. Line number 4 is that atomic design is a linear process. Now, for those of you who maybe don't know atomic design, I don't know anyone who doesn't know atomic design, but it's possible. Brad Frost came up with this idea of big things are built from small things, and that's how we can approach design as well. This is not a linear process, and Brad says it himself. It's just a mental model to help us think of interfaces as something you can deconstruct into smaller parts, basically. But that implies that you're not going left to right. You're not thinking of these small things first, but more effective is probably having the very smallest atoms, as they're put here. So we would call those design tokens, probably, and then see what designers need to make with those, and then pull what they do back into the system when you feel it's going to be useful for everyone in the team. Rather than working from left to right, it's kind of jump all the way to the right and then back to the left. So the basic building blocks of any design system are kind of the blocks of brand identity. That's kind of what you would base all the micro design decisions on that you would base these small components on. So you use those, and then you work it back into the system. Line number 5 is that design systems should predict the future. And we try to do that a lot. So we try to figure out what will we need, and we might make too many things, too many patterns that people don't need. So it keeps you busy, but it's not very useful. So there's a comparison between something like Tailwind Elements, not picking on Tailwind Elements, but just this type of thing where you have 500 different components that you might use. And if you subscribe to the 80-20 principle, you'll probably use about 20% for 80% of what you do. But another approach, which I think is very interesting, is this is OpenProps, which basically a library of design tokens. And this becomes very interesting because you can do anything you want with this. They're just basic things like colors, type sizes, they're like palettes. All my brushes, all my paints, all my different canvases, and you can combine these in many different ways. So it gives you freedom and to try things out and then figure out what choices you'd like to make with those, and then document those choices, pull them back into the system. So I think that's a more compelling way to look at these things. Systems fail when you ignore the context, and you're ignoring the context if you're just making components in isolation, hoping that teams will use them. Let designers experiment, research, try things out with these tokens that you have, and then pull these back into the system. So this is part of that designing for change. If you don't design for change, change is going to cost you a lot, and you'll avoid it. So it will start to dictate what design is. And if you want to demotivate designers, say, here are your building blocks, and you have to do it exactly like this. It's not nice if your PO can make the same design as you. That's not a good feeling. So, yeah, we're really bad at predicting the future. So let's just not do it with our design systems. Line number 6 is that having choice replaces thought. So we want to make things easier for ourselves. I've had a couple conversations here where designers envision a world where they can focus on more workflow type things, and I agree with that, but there's a whole world of interesting design decisions that you can make in your UI as well. It's not that UI is unimportant. I'll get to that a little bit later. This thing, these grid systems, we like our little tricks. so that we don't have to think as much about UI. So we can say, this is our grid. If we have this bit of content, it goes exactly in this spot. Nowhere else, only there. As soon as the context changes, then that might have to change. But we don't account for that, and that makes for a lot of extra meetings, and we don't like meetings. Carl Gerstner's book, Designing Programs, was popular in the 1960s. This was, he used morphological tables like this one to allow people to make combinations of type. So you could say, it's a way of coming up with ideas, basically. But it doesn't say anything about how good those ideas will be. It's just, these are all the options, and you can combine them together somehow. But you get these weird things like something else. That's an option. These are helpful if you're ideating on something, but they're not very helpful for knowing if you're making the right decision for your context. Again, this example. So the system, it's only a tool, and you don't want to just provide choices. You want to provide guidance about how to make the right decisions. And the final lie is that design systems are as important as we make them out to be. We spend an awful lot of time talking about design systems, working on them, and they are important, but are they really the end goal? I don't think so. I think the end goal is beauty. We want to create something. And I went too quickly. That's beauty. This is the quote. The graphic designer Massimo Vignelli said this, and I think this is what, as schooled as a graphic designer, I believe in this. We're fighting against the ugliness. And what does that mean? What does beauty mean? If I look at this painting, this is a painting by Anselm Kiefer. I love this. I love this work. I studied art and design, and this, I think it's fantastic. But you might not think it's fantastic. There's beauty in process. Whether it's very particular, meticulous, or whether it's more expressive. There's beauty in using new technology to create different kinds of art or work that you've never seen before, or that you're starting to see a lot, these kind of projection things. There's beauty. This is how I got started in graphic design, was as a teenager doing graffiti. This was the godfather of graffiti. His name is Richard Mirando, also known as Scene. Changed the landscape of dreary, gray, dark, brown New York City into canvases. And they looked amazing, and it was just amazing work. I think there's beauty in things like that. There's beauty in taking things that don't fit together and figuring out how to put them together to make a new whole that somehow does work together, like the work of David Sally or David Carson, who basically, inspired by those walls where you have concert posters that are half ripped and layered over each other, based on that, created pretty much all of the surf and skateboard aesthetic that we still know today. There are designers who just dive into their work, and they're able to totally focus just on what they do for one client, like Paul Rand. His work for IBM is very different than work that he's done for other people. There's beauty in systems. The systematic thinking about design. How can we take this design and apply it to many different places, like this Identity for MIT Media Lab, by Michael Barut and Pentagram. This is also by Vignelli, the signage system for the New York Transit Authority. And who can forget Susan Kerr's brilliant set of icons for the original Macintosh that are so important, they gave a different kind of feeling and face to interacting with a machine. This is a waste paper basket by an Italian designer, Enzo Mari. And you know, well, we don't have these now, I think. No one has paper. But we used to throw a piece of paper under the table, under the desk, and it would always bounce off the rim of your bin. And this little slice that he took off of it made it so that every single time you'd get your paper in the bin. This is brilliant design. It's beautiful. But sometimes more abstract things are beautiful, like places you've been. You see a photograph and it reminds you of a place that you really like. and it brings back all kinds of memories. So beauty becomes a little bit more abstract. This is my son, Lex, who's now 12 years old. I think this is beautiful. I think back on this moment when he played this game with me where he would hold the spoon in his mouth. I couldn't get it back out, and he would just kind of flip it up and down like that. This photo brings back a lot of different memories that can be very complex. Beauty can be complex. But any moment that you have with special people, loved ones, anything can trigger that. So what is beauty then? You might say, well, those are things you like. I didn't like any of them. Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. It's true. So what is beauty? Is it all really subjective? Maybe, maybe not. So you have these two forms in Gestalt psychology. They have this little test. Two forms here and two words, takete and maluma. If I point to the left one, which word goes with it, takete or maluma? Maluma. Takete and maluma are nonsense words. They don't exist in any language. So why do we kind of get that feeling that they fit together? Is it the shape of the letters of the word? Is it the sound? What is that? Why do we have a common feeling about that? So is there something common in beauty? I think we can all agree that this is a great illustration. Apple's first logo. It's a really bad logo. But lucky for us, ever since then, Apple makes fantastic design decisions that make a lot of sense. You don't have to be, even if you're a service designer, you understand how important kerning is. Kerning is the spacing between letters. So in case it's hard for you to see, you can imagine, hey, honey, can you get me some Christmas lights? Well, what kind do you need? I'd like the fuckering lights, please. Everyone's seen this kind of PowerPoint, and this is not beautiful, right? I had to block everything out because it's a financial industry, but it's not beautiful, and almost everyone would agree with that, except for the person who made it. Victor Papanek, one of my favorite designers, a long time ago talked about form and function, but not form versus function like we tend to do today. He talked about form as part of function. You see aesthetics down there. You might have heard the quote, the form of the chair is the thing that allows you to sit. So it's not unnecessary. It's not an extra add-on. Form is a part of function. And if we think in terms of that, then we have a more holistic view about what we do. We make these little tiny decisions about form that hopefully inform better decisions down the line. We iterate, we look at details, we look at all different possibilities of using type, we create our palettes, and that allows us to maybe take something, these are a couple of examples from our own company, take something that's on the left and maybe make it a little bit better. And you don't know the context or the purpose of these things, but you see a difference. We can take something and with these little micro decisions, allow people with a little bit of guidance to make a little better in baby steps. Just get a little better and a little better. Take something that feels dated, add some color, and make it slightly better than it was before. We're looking for small changes. You don't have to go all the way. These small changes add up over time, and they add up when you take all of them and put them together. Maybe slightly better typography. And sometimes the changes are more drastic. But all of these things are just showing that aesthetics are a part of function, and I think they form the purpose of the system. But these are agreements that you make about what's beautiful. So this system that you make is a set of decisions, but those decisions are based on and interact with agreements that you make with each other within your own organization or for a client or whatever it might be. But those agreements and those decisions are the important part of the system. The rest is just extra. The fact that you make components for these things, great, but that's extra. I'll leave you with this quote by architect Louis Kahn, which I think is fantastic. Design is not making beauty, but beauty emerges from selection, affinities, integration, and love. And it's not that we want to create beauty ourselves. With a design system, the job of a design system is to help other people to make those selections and decisions that allow that beauty to emerge. Thank you.